The lights of Hollywood have always shone brightest on the young and the beautiful, but sometimes those lights hide shadows that are darker than anyone dares to admit. In 1993, on the set of the gothic superhero film The Crow, a rising star named Brandon Lee stepped into the role that was supposed to make him a legend. With his piercing eyes, haunting presence, and a lineage that tied him directly to martial arts royalty, Brandon was poised to carry his family's legacy into a new era. But destiny had other plans. During a late-night shoot, a prop gun was fired in his direction. It was supposed to be harmless. Instead, it became the weapon that ended his life. Brandon Lee, just 28 years old, collapsed in front of cast and crew. By morning, Hollywood was shaken and whispers began to spread. Was this just a freak accident or something far more sinister? For many, Brandon's death was an eerie echo of another tragedy, the sudden and mysterious passing of his father, Bruce Lee, just 20 years earlier. Two men, two icons, both gone before their time. Coincidence? Or was there truly a curse haunting the Lee family? Even today, question linger. Did Hollywood's negligence kill Brandon? Or was he trapped by the very shadows that had haunted his father? This is not just the story of a promising actor cut down in his prime. It is the story of a son trying to step out of his father's shadow. A film that became a requiem and a legacy forever wrapped in whispers of fate. But the truth behind it is much darker. Brandon Bruce Lee was born on the 1st of February, 1965 in Oakland, California. From the very beginning, he carried not only the name of a legend, but also the weight of a legacy too heavy for any child to bear. His father was Bruce Lee, the man who revolutionized martial arts cinema, a global icon whose philosophy and films broke cultural barriers and inspired millions. His mother, Linda Lee Cadwell, was a strong and resilient woman who would soon be forced to raise Brandon and his younger sister, Shannon, in the shadow of unimaginable loss. Brandon's earliest memories were filled with both privilege and pain. On one hand, he grew up surrounded by the dazzling promise of Hollywood and the international fame of his father. On the other hand, he witnessed firsthand the relentless pressures of stardom, the constant demands, the scrutiny, and the burden of expectations. As a little boy, he often followed Bruce around film sets, watching with wide eyes as his father performed gravity-defying stunts and choreographed fight scenes that would change cinema forever. But in 1973, tragedy struck. Bruce Lee, just 32 years old, collapsed suddenly in Hong Kong. The official cause was listed as cerebral edema swelling of the brain. Yet rumors swirled instantly. Poisoned, cursed, even murdered. Brandon was only 8 years old. Overnight, the world lost a hero, and Brandon lost a father. The loss devastated the Lee family. Linda moved Brandon and Shannon back to the United States, settling in Seattle and later Los Angeles. Brandon was described as a sensitive, intelligent boy, funny, restless, and often misunderstood. Teachers noted his charisma, but also his anger, an anger rooted in absence. He grew up asking questions that had no answers. Why did his father die so young? Why did the world treat Bruce Lee as a god when to Brandon he was simply dad? This struggle defined his adolescence. At school, other kids would whisper about his name, expecting him to fight like his father, to live up to the legend. Brandon hated those comparisons. He once confided that he felt like a candle burning at both ends, pulled between wanting to honor Bruce's memory and desperate to escape the prison of being Bruce Lee's son. Yet, even in rebellion, Brandon could not escape his heritage. He trained in martial arts from a young age, not because he wanted to, but because it was part of his bloodline. Under the guidance of his father's close friend and student, Dan Inosanto, Brandon learned the same Jeet Kune Do philosophy that Bruce had created. But while Bruce had seen martial arts as a bridge to philosophy and film, Brandon initially saw it as a chain, something that forever tied him to an impossible standard. In his teenage years, Brandon turned to acting and literature as an outlet. He devoured books, loved Shakespeare, and began to dream of the stage rather than the dojo. His mother described him as a poet at heart, someone who wanted to be known for his mind and talent, not just his fists. Still, the Lee curse haunted him. Every major decision in Brandon's life seemed overshadowed by Bruce's ghost. Friends recalled that Brandon sometimes joked about not living past 30, a dark humor that felt less like a joke and more like a premonition. Despite this, Brandon pressed forward. He attended Emerson College in Boston to study theater, later moving to New York to train at the prestigious Lee Strasberg Theater Institute. On stage, he was magnetic, finally able to be seen as his own man, rather than just a son of Bruce Lee. For the first time, Brandon began to carve out an identity separate from his father's manjas, but Hollywood would not let him escape so easily. Casting directors, producers, and agents all wanted the next Bruce Lee. Brandon resisted, but the more he tried to distance himself, the more the industry tried to pull him back into his father's shadow. It was a tug of war that defined his early career and set the stage for the tragic irony to come. The role that would finally make Brandon Lee a star would also become his undoing. By the late 1982nd, Brandon Lee was determined to prove himself on his own terms. While the Lee name opened doors, it also cast an unforgiving shadow. Hollywood executives wanted him to be a carbon copy of Bruce Lee shirtless, lightning fast, a martial arts hero. But Brandon was more complicated than that. He wanted to be a serious actor, to explore complex roles, to merge physicality with vulnerability. His earliest roles were modest, yet revealing. In 1986, Brandon starred in the television movie Kung Fu, the Movie, a revival tied loosely to the original series once considered for his father. It was ironic, almost cruel. Bruce Lee had famously been passed over for the original Kung Fu television series in the 1972nd, a role many believe was written for him but handed instead to David Carradine. Brandon stepped into that legacy, but with mixed emotions. He delivered a strong performance, but the experience reinforced his fear Hollywood would never stop using his father's name as a marketing tool. Despite his resistance, Brandon began to gain traction. His first major feature was Legacy of Rage, 1986, a Hong Kong production that showed his charisma and screen presence. Though the film was heavy on action, critics noticed something different in Brandon, an intensity that went beyond punches and kicks. He wasn't just mimicking Bruce, he had his own energy, darker, more brooding, more layered. Still, Hollywood didn't know what to do with him. Roles came sporadically, an action thriller here, a martial arts cameo there. He starred in Showdown in Little Tokyo, 1991, alongside Dolph Lundgren, playing a brash young cop. The film was campy, over the top, and very much a product of its time, but Brandon stood out. Reviewers commented on his wit, his natural humor, and his undeniable screen presence. Then came Rapid Fire, 1992, his first leading role in an American studio picture. Here, Brandon finally got to show a fuller range. Yes, the martial arts sequences were dazzling, but his charisma, vulnerability, and charm shone through. He was no longer just Bruce Lee's son. He was Brandon Lee, a star in the making. The film wasn't a massive blockbuster, but it was a clear signal. This was someone destined for bigger things. That bigger thing would be The Crow. Based on the dark graphic novel by James O'Barr, The Crow told the story of Eric Draven, a musician who rises from the grave to avenge his murder and that of his fiancée. It was gothic, tragic, and unlike anything Brandon had ever done. More importantly, it gave him the chance to step into a role defined not by martial arts, but by raw emotion. For Brandon, this was the role of destiny. He poured himself into the character, channeling years of grief, anger, and longing into Eric Draven. Colleagues on set recalled how deeply committed he was, sometimes too committed. He spoke openly about how much the story mirrored his own life, a young man haunted by loss, fighting to break free from the chains of fate. Yet, beneath the excitement, Brandon felt the pressure mounting. He knew The Crow was his chance to escape his father's shadow once and for all. "This is my Hamlet," he reportedly told friends. It was the role that could redefine him, the role that would finally make Hollywood and the world see him as more than a surname. But with that promise came unease. The production was plagued with accidents, crew members injured, sets destroyed, and strange mishaps that many later called omens. Brandon, already sensitive to the rumors of a Lee family curse, sometimes laughed it off, but those close to him sensed the tension. He carried with him the memory of Bruce's mysterious death, and perhaps in the quiet of night, the fear that history might somehow repeat itself. Still, Brandon pressed forward, determined to finish the film. On screen, he was electric, haunting, tragic, unforgettable. It was as though he knew he was pouring his very soul into something that would outlive him. And in a cruel twist of fate, that is exactly what happened. Behind the rising success, Brandon Lee lived with a constant duality, the bright promise of stardom and the heavy shadow of fate. Friends described him as warm, funny, and endlessly charismatic, yet they also recalled moments when he seemed distant, troubled by thoughts he rarely voiced aloud. Brandon had inherited not only his father's looks and talent, but also the haunting legacy of a man whose life ended far too soon. Everywhere he went, reminders of Bruce Lee's death seemed to follow him. Articles compared their physiques, critics debated whether Brandon would ever replace his father, and even fans projected their grief onto him. He once confessed privately that he felt like he was living in a ghost story, as if Bruce's spirit lingered over every choice he made. This pressure was compounded by Hollywood itself, an industry notorious for turning personal pain into spectacle. On the set of The Crow, the atmosphere grew increasingly uneasy. From the beginning, the production seemed cursed. Crew members suffered serious injuries, one was electrocuted, another had a screwdriver pierce his hand. A storm destroyed expensive equipment, setting the schedule back by weeks. Even a truck carrying props mysteriously caught fire. To superstitious minds, it felt like something malevolent was watching. Brandon tried to dismiss these accidents, joking with castmates about the curse of the Crow. Yet, in private, he carried a different weight. The story of Eric Draven, a man who rises from the grave, hit too close to home. He told one friend that the role felt written in blood, as if he was destined to play it. He poured every ounce of his pain into the character, his performance growing darker, more intense as filming went on. But there were other shadows in Brandon's life. Away from the set, he struggled with the burden of expectation, the constant comparisons, and the gnawing fear of dying young. His fiancée, Eliza Hutton, described him as tender and deeply loving, but admitted he sometimes carried a melancholy she couldn't quite reach. Brandon would laugh about superstition, yet he often spoke of fate as if he believed his family's story was not entirely in his control. The production itself became grueling. Long nights, dangerous stunts, and poor safety oversight pushed everyone to the edge. Budgets were tight, schedules were brutal, and corners were cut. Hollywood had a history of treating action stars as expendable, and Brandon, desperate to prove himself, pushed through exhaustion, ignoring the risks. By early 1993, whispers of a curse grew louder. Tabloids dredged up Bruce Lee's mysterious death, fueling speculation that Brandon was next. Some fans even pointed to eerie coincidences. In Game of Death, Bruce Lee's character is shot by a prop gun on a film set a chilling mirror of what was about to happen to his son. Still, Brandon remained committed. He was weeks away from completing The Crow. He was weeks away from marrying Eliza. He was weeks away from finally stepping into the light of his own destiny. And yet, that destiny was about to be stolen. The 31st of March, 1993. It was just another day on the set of The Crow in North Carolina. But for Brandon Lee, it would become the day destiny intervened with merciless precision. The scene called for Eric Draven to confront his murderers, a climactic moment that required Brandon to be shot at by a prop gun. Everyone knew the sequence. Everyone assumed the gun was safe. It was not. Earlier that day, a series of safety oversights had gone unnoticed. A prop assistant had mistakenly loaded a dummy round with a fragment of live ammunition lodged inside the barrel. It was a tiny, almost invisible mistake, but in that split second, it became a lethal weapon. As the camera rolled, Brandon raised the gun to his chest, his performance perfect, his expression haunting, embodying the pain and vengeance of Eric Draven. The shot rang out, a flash of disbelief, a sudden horrifying silence. Brandon collapsed. Crew members screamed. Panic erupted. Emergency personnel rushed to the scene, performing CPR and rushing him to the nearby hospital. The young actor, just 28 years old, was pronounced dead hours later. The news spread like wildfire. Hollywood was stunned. Fans across the globe were shocked, and the whispers began immediately. The Lee curse had struck again. Headlines screamed of tragedy, accidents, and eerie coincidences. Social media did not exist as it does today, but newspapers and television broadcasted the horror non-stop. Some wrote of a cursed lineage, others of negligence, and many mourned a star gone far too soon. Brandon's fiancée, Eliza Hutton, was devastated. His mother, Linda Lee Cadwell, was shattered, having lost her husband decades earlier under mysterious circumstances. And the world watched, horrified, as yet another life, brimming with potential, was extinguished too early. Investigations followed, revealing the horrific chain of errors on set, lapses in safety protocols, miscommunications between prop and special effects teams, and a studio that had pushed for efficiency over caution. It was ultimately ruled an accident, a tragedy that could have been prevented, but for many, the shadow of the Lee family curse loomed larger than any official explanation. Brandon's death was both sudden and symbolic. Like his father, he had been a man who seemed destined to change cinema, only to be cut down before his time. Unlike Bruce, Brandon's story was intertwined with modern Hollywood, a world that promised safety but delivered tragedy. Colleagues recalled the pain of returning to work, filming scenes knowing that the spirit of their fallen co-star lingered on every frame. The Crow itself became a posthumous masterpiece. Brandon's performance was haunting, almost prophetic. Critics praised his depth, charisma, and intensity. Fans mourned the loss of a star whose career had only begun to blossom. The film, released months later, became a cult classic, immortalizing Brandon Lee on screen even as the world struggled to accept his absence in life. Yet, the tragedy extended beyond the set. For Hollywood, it was a cautionary tale of negligence and the price of ambition. For the Lee family, it was a cruel echo of history, a son, like his father, taken too soon, leaving behind a legacy forever intertwined with both brilliance and sorrow. In the days following, messages poured in from around the globe, tributes from fans, letters from aspiring actors inspired by Brandon's determination, and memorials in theaters and universities. The narrative of a promising life cut short became legend, and the question that haunted everyone remained: could this have been prevented, or was it always written in the shadows that had followed the Lee family for generations? Brandon Lee's life, though tragically brief, left a mark that endures far beyond the screen. He had stepped into the shadow of a legend, only to carve out his own path with courage, talent, and a sensitivity that few could match. The Crow immortalized him, capturing not only his martial skill and charisma, but also a profound vulnerability that resonated with audiences worldwide. In the years since his death, Brandon has become more than an actor. He is a symbol of potential unfulfilled, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictable weight of legacy. Students study his performances, filmmakers reference his intensity, and fans continue to celebrate his artistry, an enduring echo of a life that could have soared even higher. The tragedy of Brandon Lee also sparked change in Hollywood, leading to stricter safety protocols on film sets, ensuring that no other performer would face a similar fate. Yet beyond policy, it reminds us that brilliance often walks hand in hand with fragility, and that the lives behind the screen carry stories far more complex than any character they portray. Brandon Lee remains a cautionary tale and an inspiration. A son of a legend, he became a legend in his own right, a young man who dared to honor his heritage while striving to define his own destiny. We remember him not only for the roles he played, but for the spirit he carried. And the haunting question that lingers: what heights could Brandon Lee have reached had fate not intervened?